right. So we are now uh, covering prophets that are called return prophets. Um, there are three in this category, although other prophets have also hinted at it, like Jeremiah really famously gave a prophecy that the captivity that the people of Israel or Judah would have would last for 70 years and then they'd be allowed to come home. Okay, so these prophets are working with the fulfillment of that. That even though if we click back, there were all these exciting stories in the book of Daniel. It was a very dark time and very scary for the people, but God still had a hope and a future for them. Like Jeremiah 29:11 says, even in their captivity, God wasn't done with them, and He did want to restore them, to hold them by the hand, and to lead them um, by ransoming them out of their sins and disciplines into a new day, into restoration. So, when Babylon was taken over by the next world power, Persia, which happened during Daniel's lifetime and during the 70 years, when Persia came to power, they played a different mindset of rule than the others. Remember, Assyria and Babylon were slightly different than each other. Assyria was more psychological warfare. Babylon was more like indoctrination, like brainwashing. And when Persia comes to power, they are intense, but they also they lessen some of the restrictions where people can have freedom of religion that they are ruling over, and they're also they allow people to return to their homelands that have been taken over by Babylon. So if you look, there's three return trips of Jewish people back to their homeland, three groups that are led by three different leaders. Okay, so Zerubbabel and Joshua on the first wave. They go back in Joshua's different Joshua, of course, than Joshua 1:9 that we've memorized, but Zerubbabel and Joshua, who's a governor priest. Um, or Zerubbabel was governor, Joshua's the priest. They come back and they rebuild their homes and then also God's house. Okay, Ezra with the next wave teaches the people God's law, and then Nehemiah with the last wave rebuilds the wall around Jerusalem so that the people can be safe. But in total, about 40,000 people return. That was much, much less. They're just like a remnant of the people that used to dwell in that capital city. It used to be really big and massive. Okay, so the prophets that we're going to look at, um, specifically the first two, are during this first wave when they're rebuilding the house. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so our first prophet is Haggai. Okay, well, the people have road tripped from distant Persia to Jerusalem. And when they get there, as you might imagine, the first thing you would do, or if you ever watch Bear Grylls on like survival show or something, you gotta make shelter when you get to a place. Because remember, everything had been burned to the ground by Babylon when they sieged the city. So this included God's house. So God's house looks like this. And anyways, the first thing that the people do when they come home is they build their own homes, okay, which is not terrible to do that, but they left God's house in shambles and they proceeded to make their homes truly fancy. Like they did paneling on their home, which would be like a luxurious thing. It's not like, hey, let's, just have it be good enough for now. They just really were prioritizing themselves and neglecting making God's house a high up thing on their priority list. So God describes how in Haggai chapter 1 that they are actually bringing curses upon themselves by the way that they're living. that even though they go out and they start planting food, that there's like a curse on their food, or they put money in their pocket and there's a hole in their pocket and they lose their money, or they put coats on when it's cold, but their coats just won't warm them up. And God tells them with the verse here that he tells them after they've been there a while, is it time for you yourselves to dwell in paneled houses while this house, my house, his house, lies in ruins? Okay. Sorry, Haggai says that about the Lord's house. Okay. So, very cool. One of the few times in the Bible you see the people rise up and they obey. They are like, you're right, God hasn't been on our priority list, and there's curses when we just make life about yourself. So they go and they start rebuilding God's house with their time and effort and money. They like go up into the hills to get big old pieces of wood because there isn't like a Lowe's or a Walmart. They're putting a lot of sweat and labor into rebuilding God's house. Okay. And God tells them that to mark down the day that they started rebuilding God's house, because he says, from that day on, I will bless you. Like if you go back in your records, you're going to see, oh my goodness, look how God materially blessed us when we gave of our resources, our strength, our efforts to make him a priority. Okay. So he promises them a rich harvest to as they prioritize him and give to him. Okay. And it's so cool when the people obey. He says 2 times that he's the Lord who, or I'm sorry, once. No, he does. He says, be strong. He does say it twice. Be strong, courageous, for I am with you. I am with you as they're obeying. Okay, so all the frustrations and the scary things of coming in to a new place that's been burned out and they don't have enough supplies yet, God promises to bless them as they're prioritizing Him. Okay, moving on to Zechariah. Now, Zechariah here, and he is speaking at the same time uh, to these groups of people, okay, that again, they're rebuilding, and it's hard work just being in this like this burned out place that had been just totally gutted for all its resources, and they've returned. It's just it's a discouraging, dry desert kind of place. Okay, so see my little guy in the profile picture. It's supposed to look like rain coming down after just really difficult uh, heat, and that rain can just be like balm to your soul, like, oh yes, because that's what Zechariah's words really are to the people. They're encouraging. Okay, so God speaks through Zechariah to talk about how he wants to be a wall of fire around the city, that one day they're going to be, they won't even have to have walls anymore, which at the time they didn't have a wall. But that God can be a wall of fire. And one day it points to this, it's like talking about a preview of heaven, that one day we'll be at peace and the Lord will, we won't even have to have walls. But God talks about how he can be a wall of fire around a city and the glory inside of it. Then in chapter 3 of Zechariah, you have this amazing story, and I'd really recommend reading it. Zechariah chapter 3, where the high priest Joshua is standing. This is a vision that Zechariah has. The high priest Joshua is standing in front of God with disgusting clothes on. It's maybe a little hard to see here, but it's like truly like super gross clothes, like filthy, as he's standing in front of this amazing vision of God. Okay, Well, Satan comes up to to Joshua, and um, he accuses him um, of being gross, okay? And he's not wrong, okay? Because the high priest wearing that nasty clothes in front of God is gross, okay? Well, then the Lord stands also beside the high priest, and he says, "The Lord rebuke you, O Satan. The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Isn't this a stick plucked from the fire?" Um, so God tells Satan to be quiet with all his accusations. Then it goes on and it says, now Joshua was standing before the angel, clothed with filthy garments. And the angel said to those who were standing before him, "Remove the filthy garments from him." And to him he said, "Behold, I have taken your iniquity away from you, and I will clothe you with pure, clean clothes." Okay? And the angel of the Lord was standing by. If you look at the end of that next verse there, basically what happens is in this vision there's these symbolic clothes of wearing gross sins in front of God's presence. Satan is pointing out how disgusting this even the best of them, the high priest, is in front of God. But God tells Satan to be quiet and reminds him, and this person was bound for destruction, like a stick that was going to go to the fire, but I pulled him out. And then he commands new clean clothes to be brought to wear for the high priest, and the person puts it on, and God says, "I've taken away your iniquity." Okay, so this is such a powerful thing on forgiveness. It's also very powerful to understand that Satan is standing there accusing you for the things that you've done, and he's not wrong, but God himself pulls us out of destruction of his own free will, and he puts on his righteousness upon us, and we actually wear it. Is Christ's righteousness that he lived out when he was walking this earth, and that is given to us as gift to stand in front of God like that. So Zechariah goes on and it describes the coming Messiah. It describes Jesus in great detail. Okay, it talks about how one day he's going to bring a servant called the branch, and when this person comes, God would remove the sins of the people in one single day. Okay, now that's crazy for them to think about, because in one single day, for the amount of sacrifices to be done for every single person in a nation is it's like impossible. So they'd be like, how could all the sins be taken away in a single day? Okay, and it describes in Zechariah this priest that was going to come, that was also going to be a king, and it would be in a new temple. Okay, now all of those things would be so confusing to them because priests and kings weren't from the same family line. So it would be like, wait, how would this be? And then in a new temple, they were working on rebuilding a temple right then. So it would be like, wait, okay. And so there's a lot of foreshadowing of what would come. Okay, and then there's this direct verse. It's so amazing. It says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey." Okay, that verse is quoted about Jesus when he comes in on Palm Sunday as he's going to the cross. Okay, but then finally in Zechariah 13, it's just, or 12 and 13, very end of 12, so powerful. Okay, it says, "I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy, so that when they look on me, on him whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly over him as one weeps over the firstborn." If you jump down to 13. "On that day there shall be a fountain opened in the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from sin and uncleanness." Okay, now it's probably hard to just take in what I've just said without looking at it in the actual Bible, but the person speaking in Zechariah is God in verse 10 of chapter 12. God will do these things, okay? It's speaking from the first person, And then it says, when they look on me, okay, so God, on him whom they have pierced, okay, and it's like, wait, what? God was talking. So God is going to be a him that gets pierced. And then when God gets pierced, we're going to cry as one cries for an only child, a firstborn child. Okay, and on that day that God gets pierced, a fountain will be opened for the house of David, okay, to clean them from all their sins and uncleanness. Okay, these prophecies were written hundreds of years before Jesus was alive. Okay, and the idea that both God and this person are spoken of in a way that's very layered is makes us feel more like, uh, Jesus isn't talking out of line here when he later says that he's the Son of God, because he is both God and man. And because of that, his blood is the perfect blood that can wash away all of our disobeying. The perfect lamb that is good for all humanity because he's not just one man, he's also God. Okay, over and over in Zechariah, it describes God as being exceedingly jealous for his people. Okay, and I hope you can rest in that today, that God is not apathetic towards you and he's not heartless or just really distant from your life. His love is jealous and in the best sense of that word, that he cares very much about you loving him back and worshiping him, because that's what you're meant to do. So thanks for listening.